Okay, hi, I just got back from cross-country skiing, took a shower. I don't know how high energy this video will be, but I got a question from Omnia to talk about the Haavara agreement. There was an agreement between, it was an agreement between Germany and the Zionists of the time in the early part of the 20th century, or 1933 to be specific, to have an Israeli state. And so they agreed with the British to use the part of the British Mandate region to create a place for Jews. So 1933, and so the idea, it's interesting because there was a lot of opposition to it on all sides. So essentially you had this agreement that the Jews in Germany and elsewhere could have a homeland, a place they could go in what today's Israel, right? So in the British Mandate, but there was a lot of disagreement among everybody. So you'd have Jews disagreeing about it, Jewish leaders disagreeing that it's completely opposite sides, very, very dichotomous and opposing, not just subtle scholarly disagreements, very, very extreme antagonism to each other. Jewish leaders, Zionist leaders, split on the topic. Even Zionist leaders, German leaders, and others around the time completely split on the topic, that on the idea that you could send, that people could go on their own volition, not send, but they could go to this place in former Palestine. Now, it was called Palestine because my great-grandma had a Bible. We weren't religious. She wasn't religious, but she picked up a nice, big, huge Bible. Huge, big, thick Bible from somewhere. Some inheritance or something. Maybe some part of her family was a bit religious. This is back in the 1880s. I believe that Bible was the 1880s. It was written on it. All those big old Bibles from the Victorian era. Beautiful paintings in it. So that's the main reason I looked at it as a kid and a teenager, because we still had it. And she had passed away, but I guess she was still alive at that time. But very interesting story about my great-grandma. Oh my God. So there you go, off on a tangent if I go that way. But this big, huge Bible, and there was a map in there of that part of the Middle East. And so there was a big golden part painted in gold leaf of some sort against this slightly coloured map. There's some coloration to the borders and other things around there. And so Egypt was slightly on there, and there'd be this a big gold leaf bit across the middle, across the whole of Palestine and beyond, as far as I could tell. As far as I remember, the whole of Israel today and way beyond. And it was called the Holy Land, and I somehow connected it to the idea of Palestine. So I think it might have said on there Palestine as well, right? There's no Israel on there. So this is kind of interesting when you look at the history and where does all this come from. So the Haavara agreement to give Israelis or Jews a place where they can settle down, right? So first of all, it's a bit funny in this day and age. Not funny, there's nothing funny about this, and if you think I'm on one side or the other, go see my other stuff. I don't have time to go over it here, but there's a lot of detail, and maybe I'll try to make a shorter version of those videos and comments. But just go to my Twitter page to get a rough idea. And here's some images of some videos I made, so you get an idea from the titles here. So the Haavara agreement, so let's just call it the transfer agreement. So it was called the transfer agreement, informally. So transfer agreement, which means transfer. It doesn't just mean go there if you want. But there was a lot of antagonism against Jews throughout that whole region for centuries, many 1,000 years, and so, or more, longer. So across, as they entered into Europe. There's a whole story behind that that's really interesting to think about, or it's my version of it, I guess. But I think one of the things I want to say up front here is you can go to a scholar and ask them about the Haavara agreement and the history of the Jews in that part of Europe, Germany, Russia, Europe in general. And then you can find another scholar that says almost the exact opposite. Yeah, I'm an artist with a graduate or a master's degree in philosophy and philosophy of science. So you put those two things together. Artists put things together. That's what they do. Their brains are structured for that. And I've been an artist since I was a kid. I also have a master's degree in philosophy and philosophy of science. The most important part being philosophy of science, but it goes into all these other philosophies. Because philosophy of science, there's no other philosophy except the philosophy of science. There is nothing else. In my opinion. We can talk about that. So it's logic and rationale, reasoning, observation, and conclusions. So not saying science is there's so many avenues to this. I don't want to go down that road, because if you look at my other stuff, you'll understand that I don't think science is like some sacred thing that's always right. It's just not. It's like a religion itself in some many ways these days. Dangerous religion. So aspects of it. That's why you really need somebody who's across the board, who has a wide range. Artist, since I was a kid, born into a family of artists, done nothing but that since I was a kid. I'm 62 years old now, and then have been absolutely fascinated by different aspects of philosophy, philosophy of science, astrophysics, physics, since I was 10 years old. So, and then having the degree. So you need that broad range and a couple of other aspects for someone to be able to really put all these things together. I'm sure there are other people, you tell me who, because I've got a lot of topics right in the past few years that many people did not get right. No one got them all right. So this one is interesting. So you get to this Haavara agreement, this transfer agreement. It reminds me of what's going on today in England, Britain, mostly England, I presume, where they're saying, oh, we're going to send African black people, illegal immigrants, who maybe don't have any papers and can't go back to their own country. We're going to send them to Rwanda. Transfer agreement between Rwanda and London, or the British Parliament, or the British. I'm not sure that's been put into place yet, but it's a definite serious proposal, and it seems to be going ahead. I'm not sure. If that goes ahead, you're doing the same as the Germans did in 1933. Transfer agreement between Rwanda and England. Pretty sure the Scots are not for that, but they might be. There'll be some. So even the idea of it, even bringing that up as an idea, has been seriously discussed by people like Boris Johnson and the new guy. He hasn't. I believe he's for it. He's pro this idea of sending black people who are illegal immigrants, don't have any homeland of their own, to go to Rwanda and make that their homeland and pay Rwanda to take them. It's not that much different. Transfer agreement. What are you doing? So that's the first thing that's kind of funny. Not funny, like I said, there's nothing funny about what's been going on. It's disgusting what's been going on in Gaza, right? And in general. But, many have huge criticisms of Israel. So don't let that put you off. I also see both sides, right? So the Haavara agreement, yeah. So this agreement to take a people. Here's how it works: a people who are, you have to go back and think broadly. Thousands upon thousands of years. A people, many different people, have been traveling along the Silk Road, or the Silk Roads, but they just call it the Silk Road, the ancient trading routes from Western Asia to the Middle East and through to even as far as Egypt and even as far as Byzantium or Istanbul. So, and onwards to Europe. So these traders all up in the region, these trading people. So the way I think it worked was there was a trading class, It's the way humans have always done things, especially in Eurasia, right? So there was a class of people, goes back to the Indus Valley civilization, where they were trading all the way up as far as Baghdad and beyond. So there's many aspects of ancient Baghdad and even the people who are related back and forth, these trading routes where people are also being traded, don't forget, and people are moving just naturally from place to place. So ancient trading caste it's like a caste. You know how the Indian system, the ancient system in India, had a caste system. It's like a caste. And they're called the caravan people. The Jewish people basically come from that caste. They were the traders. And they traded right out to what we now call Israel. And they traded with the cities, which they called, or was in the Bible, are called the Philistines, the Palestinians. It's another word for Palestinian. So these trading people had a class. And whether it was really Jewish at the time or when it really started, that's a different story, because there would be different types. There would be the Jewish traders. There would be what we now call the Romani traders, who would have been more northerly, trading throughout northern Europe and up even as far as Ukraine and even as far as Russia. Traders, which today the Romani people have been severely oppressed in Ukraine in recent times in Ukraine and other places. But we used to call them gypsies and tinkers. And that's probably a derogatory word, but it just comes from the stuff they were carrying that tinkled along on their carts. I think that's where it comes from. In fact, I picked potatoes when I was a young teenager. We used to go out, me and my friends used to go to the local farms, pick potatoes for a month or so, save up the money and go on holiday, go on vacation to camping somewhere on our own. So we were doing that as young teenagers. From about 12 years onwards for about 4 or 5 years, maybe 4 years. Every year, picking potatoes. This one farm, the gypsies would turn up with the tinkers. They'd be the biggest part of the group, and we'd be picking potatoes along with them. Now, those are not the real Romani, though. Those could have been all sorts of people, but definitely, since it's an island, they're mostly Scottish and possibly some English, but mostly Scottish at that time. But if you think about the gypsies, what we call the gypsies, if you were in France, we'll keep Britain out of it just now because it's an island and it's a bit different, but if you're in France and there were gypsies trading across there in ancient times, or northern Germany, or up in northwest Germany, or anywhere like that. So the traders, the Romani, the gypsies, trading, and that was their class. They didn't have a place. Look up Peaky Blinders, the very first, where they came from. They came from a travelling people, right? Kind of like the Romanis, if not the Romanis. They were the Romanis, supposed to be in that show, I don't know, but look it up if you haven't seen it. It's kind of interesting. They come out of the gypsies. And so the Romani people go way back through, well, obviously it's sort of centred around Romania, places like that, but these are the trading people for the north. The Jews interacted with them as traders, the caravan people, and it became a class. Now, I'm not sure anybody knows where this comes from, but you have the Jews becoming, well, first of all, they're traders, I presume, to, let's say, Alexandria in Egypt or some great city like that, right? So Cairo or something like that. So they're traders as they trade in ancient times, possibly, or they're trading along there. There's some group related to them, maybe, and then they become slaves. And that's the whole story of Moses coming out of Egypt and running away with his people because they've become enslaved, and he's not for that. Right? They were traders. They probably used as workers in the beginning, and they probably were pretty poor in some cases and just worked, and then became sort of more like slaves. And when they realized they were slaves, after hundreds of years maybe, they ran away as a big group and crossed the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, which is the northern tip of the Red Sea, full of reeds, right? Grasses. And so you could sort of navigate your way through these grasses, perhaps, and then the Egyptian chariots get stuck in the mud. So he didn't part the seas, but if you want to go by that story that he parted the seas, he didn't. He parted the Reed Seas in his coracle with all the others following, or maybe they walked. But whatever they did, it probably on a raft or something through it. But that's just my little hypothetical bit there that I think is more real. So Moses goes off to the deserts of what is now northeast Egypt, I suppose, southern Israel, and so they don't have any money. So what do? They trade obviously. What are you going to do? You have to find something to trade with, right? So they start trading, and then there's all these, I guess there's other Jews around the area who are also trading. And so these trading people, that's what they are. That's why they talk about the Philistines, the city slickers. Philistines, in the sense of the Bible, is just another word for the city slickers, right? Like the country folk and the city slickers, right? So, or the people who live in the city. So it's the nomadic people, the nomadic people. Nomadic, they don't stay somewhere. They keep moving, they're trading, they're the caravan people. That's what the Jews are originally referred to according to some scholars. And I'll go find another scholar that disregards that, and you'll have found another scholar that disregards a scholar who says this, and you'll find another one that says the opposite, and someone far in between, and someone else. But that's what they were, the caravan people. I have a theory that Jesus, when he went off for his, 12 years in the desert or something? I forget. I have a theory that he went off with his uncles in the Jewish caravan people, the traders, and went along the Silk Road, possibly as far as Asia, India, or at least Kashmir, which there's stories of him in Kashmir. So why not? It's so obvious that a young guy, 12 years old, which was becoming a man at that, it was considered you're about a man now, it's time to start being a man now, back then. So you go off with your uncles to learn the trade across the Silk Roads. Maybe you'll learn some really awesome things out in Kashmir and places like that, or Afghanistan, and you come back with these awesome sort of tricks, maybe, or skills, at the very least, right? So I have a theory, if there was a Jesus, there's a good chance that he went far east, and he's out in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, but he was also away from home for 12 years or something. That's where he went. He went off with his uncles. I mean, his dad probably said, yeah, your uncle will look after you, that's all right, go ahead. And it's a big adventure, why wouldn't you? Of course you would, 12, 13 years old, whatever. And also it's part of a tradition. So you go off, you learn the trade, you learn to be a trader. The caravan people who traded all the way, very, very intelligent, clever, incredibly resilient people, because they had to trade across these dangerous places. Silk Road, they became really tough. And right through Baghdad and beyond, right? So maybe they were only trading 100 miles, 200 miles, but some of them would have gone further, so on, so forth. Some would have gone all the way to the east. So you had to be tough and putting up with all sorts of things. And I won't go into that, take too long. But basically, the people who are supposed to be the traders stay out of the city. You can come in and trade, but don't get any heirs. You're a lower class. And I'm talking about ancient people, talking about those people, not me saying them today, obviously, right? So you have these trading people going on throughout the whole of Eurasia. The Romanis, they were very closely intermingled, and the Romanis and the Jews, the caravan people. So, and they've also been heavily persecuted, both the Romanis and the Jews, throughout history for thousands of years. The Jews for thousands of years since Roman times. So I hear this word Zionist, and since I was in Israel in 1986, travelling around, I slept on top of the Masada, if you know what that is, under the stars on my own. And one of the things that freaked me out while I was sleeping there, watching the full moon come up over Jordan, and then watching the sunrise come up over Jordan the next day. But during the night, sleeping there on my own, I was a bit freaked out, because the ancient story from thousands of years ago was that a lot of Jews ended up there during Roman times, being hunted down by Romans, and the story is that they ended up being under siege, starving to death, running out of water, because they had a very sophisticated system up there for keeping water in that ancient palace that was on top of this little mountain, little hill, rocky mountain, or hill rather, so with a flat top on it. And it's pretty interesting to look up if you don't know what I'm talking about. So very good system there, ancient system, very sophisticated system. You could hold water in there and go under siege, and with your animals and other things you could sort of survive. Right, so, but apparently they committed suicide in the end when the Roman siege and the Romans came in and took over, right? Now, that story is disputed whether they actually committed suicide, so that's just an ancient story that, well, I was thinking about it because I didn't know. up on the Masada and going, oh, what if, oh man, loads of people might have committed suicide right where I'm sleeping. It's a bit creepy, right? But it was a great experience. But the way I thought about it as I looked into it, those were called the Zealots. So those were Israeli, or rather Jewish, zealots, right? That's where the word zeal, when you're really passionate and absolutely won't give up. Zealot, you're a fundamentalist, basically a fundy, as we call them these days, right? Like a fundy Christian, only, yeah, like that. So, but they're zealots for Judaism, or their group, or their tribe. And the Romans, they've been fighting the Romans hunt them down, whatever, and say, you can't do this, that, and the other, and then either let them starve or kill them off or disperse them. But the Zealots, I often think of the Zionists of today, in my mind, because I've slept on top of the Masada, in my mind, those are sort of the Zealots of ancient times. They're just people who are very zealous about their religion, right? Now, in this case, yeah, the Zionists agreed, going back to the Haavara agreement, had agreement with the Nazis and the British that they could have a homeland in the British Mandate, or Palestine, rather called Palestine in ancient times, right? So it was called Palestine by the Egyptians, for example, and the Greeks. So the Haavara agreement says you can go there. And just like this thing with Rwanda today that I talked about, right? So the reason for that, though, is going back to this trading people. They're trading all around for thousands of years. They end up as being a sort of a caste of sorts, right? So they're the trading people. That's your caste. You do that job, and they do it, and they're really good at it. These trading peoples, various different sects of Judaism, by the way. So they might not even be called Jews in some aspects of it, but these peoples, these caravan people, have been moving up and down all through. They're starting to move into Europe. They don't have a homeland because they're the caravan people, the tinkers, the gypsies. Same with the Romani. And that's why when they start to move into Europe, and they say, yeah, come and trade with us, but you should go away now. Well, they stopped going away because obviously over time, that's just natural that you start to live in a place. The gypsies, when I was growing up in Scotland, were allowed to live anywhere, almost anywhere, right? Camping, right? And so that, actually, an interesting aside there, is that turns into what's called the travelling people, or the travellers, of modern England mostly, which are just a bunch of hippies going around, and they have had the right to stay at certain places, or certain farmers would say, yeah, you can stay there. So that's actually interrelated to the old travelling people tradition, which is essentially the gypsies and the Peaky Blinders. so that tradition was always, yeah, you're trading, you can stay in that field. Or you're trading, yeah, you're going to stay by the side of that Roman road, which we all use. Yeah, fine. Ancient road, right? And then up in Germany, Ukraine, Russia starts to have these riots and things like that, pogroms, against the Jews who are sticking around and becoming part of it. And it's this thing that always goes on, that the other people are not us. And so that all starts up, and it goes into sort of Zionism in the late 1800s, where Zionists are saying we need our homeland because we can't go back to Bulgaria or wherever our ancient ancestors came from, and now we're in Kiev or around Ukraine or Russia or Germany, Poland, especially Ukraine, by the way, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time, and Kiev being such a powerful place that they started to settle down, and some people didn't like it, so there were riots, and the whole system of that trading people, who are really good at it, by the way, really good. Almost became like this sort of a trait that people recognise, that you're all about business, trading, haggling, and business, business, business. Now, people are going to say that I'm being anti-Semitic there, but that's just a fact. They were the traders. They were experts. They should be admired for it in many regards, especially in this age of capitalism. If you're a capitalist, yeah, you should admire the great trading skill of the caravan people, ancient peoples, right? And so, yeah, you'd be in the cities and around Ukraine or Russia, whatever, and they start to settle down and not go home. Oh, it's too cold now, let's just stay here this winter. Okay, you can stay there for the winter, that's fine. And then they end up staying and maybe building their own places, things like that, because it wasn't like today. It wasn't like there were so many villages, towns, roads, cities everywhere in Europe today. Ukraine's is a very huge, and it's not as got as many cities and things like that as a lot of other places in Europe, but certainly there were vast areas that it was just say, yeah, you can camp there and trade while you're up here, right? That happened in Scotland when I was growing up. They could camp anywhere, not anywhere, but they had places they knew that could camp and nobody would complain because they'd done it for generations. And like I say, I don't know where they came from. They could have come from England. They could have come from abroad, from Europe. But there was no problems anywhere in Britain up until about the 1980s when Maggie Thatcher comes in, and with the gypsies staying and then leaving after they'd done their trade, or oftentimes they'd trade themselves as workers. Like I said, when we were picking potatoes as kids, there'd be a lot of gypsies picking with us, right? Good people. And so they'd come in for the picking season, just like Mexicans do today in America, right? And we have Jamaicans coming in. It's all above board and good stuff. It's all legal. It's legal. They have proper visas. So a lot of Jamaicans come up here for the summer and go home for the winter. Have a good life. Probably better than me. Going back to Jamaica, having fun with the money they've made. But it's not an easy job doing that farming around us for 5 months or more. But that's what it's like. Same as today, no different. Migrant workers or traders or expert traders, all of it. So they're infiltrating or filtering into, over thousands of years, filtering into Northern Europe, Russia, Germany, everywhere. And they're starting to settle down, and locals get, as they always do, get adamant that these people who keep themselves very separate because they are a different culture, they're a different caste, as I have already explained, and they have a certain view of themselves as being different. They don't want to intermingle that much. And so, no, we're different. And so now you have a sect of Jews today who don't believe Israel should have a state because they're the travelling people. So, yeah, those travelling people in England, I forgot to talk about that. That turned into these young hippies becoming called travelling people, which only just got extinguished in the 1980s and 1990s. I don't think it's around much more. You can still do it in some places, but you can do it in Scotland because there's no law against it. No one can stop people from crossing the land as long as they don't do any damage. That's the right to roam, Romany. The Romanis. The right to roam still exists in Scotland, except the only thing with Scotland is who the hell would want to spend the winter there? It's a wet, cold, miserable, windy, God-forsaken place. You don't want to be there in winter. You want to go south. That's what they did. The gypsies, we're out of here. We're not staying here. We're going south to southern England or to Europe. So, yeah, the Romanis given the right to roam in Scotland. That doesn't exist in England. So under Thatcher, Maggie Thatcher, 1980s, she really put a stop to that, and future governments really started to stop the travelling people who by that time were sort of hippies, taking the right to roam around as their own right as well, right? So yuppies, or middle class and sometimes working class, but mostly middle class hippies who'd disowned their parents or been disowned, whatever, and were travelling around as living the good life in a way. A lot of hippies, stuff like that. I met quite a few of them when I was at art college in England. So it was going on a lot then, this travelling people. So this tradition was inbuilt into British law that you could do this, especially in Scotland today, even today. But so that was in places like Russia, would be the Russian Empire, which would be Western Russia, you know, Ukraine, Germany, Poland, Finland was part of the Russian Empire at one point. So that place is getting a bit fed up with these people staying and actually having children and settling down, right, for whatever reason. And so in some ways they think they're taking our jobs, kind of thing, right? Or they're taking our land, and they're taking our trade. So maybe they stayed in a very small place, didn't take anybody's land, but they started trading sheep or goats or something, and that local farmers, hey, you're taking my trade, you're selling it cheaper than me. Hey, what's going on here? You're selling it too cheap. I got a farmhouse to maintain and some workers. You got your little tribe, your little group, your family group, and you're taking my job, taking my business, right? So that happens everywhere, all the time, everywhere, right? So this is not a slur on anybody. It's what humans do, right? And so this thing of where people don't have a homeland, now they're looking for a homeland, finally ends up in the Haavara agreement and the transfer agreement to go to either, I think it was either a choice between Madagascar and Palestine. So they end up in Palestine. I think the British blocked the Madagascar idea in the end. So Madagascar, Africa. So, which is so ironic because now the story is that Jews don't like African Jews coming to the homeland, Israel. Oh, what planet am I on? But it's so natural when you think about it. All these roaming people, as human society grows, gets bigger, more of us, less land available. You're roaming so far that you end up being part of that, part of whatever place you've roamed into. Like, let's say you've gone far east, or maybe you've gone far north in Europe. Wherever it is, the roamers, I'll call them the roamers, the Romani, the Jews, the caravan people, they end up in these diverse places as a vast diaspora. And so there's all this antagonism, and it happens in Russia, it happens in Germany, Poland, and obviously that ends up in the 1933 Haavara transfer agreement, because people are xenophobic, and also it's a different way of life. And then you've got this Christianity thing, which Christianity had all these ideals that's different from Judaism, including way back. Christianity did not have Christian societies, did not have, you couldn't charge interest on loans and things like that, which that all changed. And it's only natural that, well, the Jewish people, the traders, did end up charging interest on things. I could go into why that would be. It's very natural, right? You're trading across these trading routes, and you get to the city, and the city merchant, he's a merchant, he's not very rich, but he's pretty well off, and he's the intermediary to the really wealthy people. You know, the caravan people don't come near the big mansion, but these other traders will trade with you, and then they'll bring the stuff to the big mansions, right? So these middle merchants would have been trading with the caravan people, the Jews, and the trading people, being experts, and that's their way of life, would have said, look, here's the goods we brought, and the city person says, I can't really pay you for that right now. And they say, well, we brought them all this way, and we are your main group that you trade with, so we'll give you these goods if you give us a small down payment, and you pay us some more when we're back here in 3 months or 6 months' time, right? You pay more, but give us a little bit extra so that we're sort of loaning you this. And the guy's like, okay, well, I could probably sell those off, make a bit of a profit, pay them off when they come back, and I'll make a profit, right? So he makes the calculation real quick, haggling, and that's it. The deal is done. So the Jewish or trading people, whatever trading people it is, comes back 3 months or even a year later and says, oh yeah, you owe us that stuff, right, or the money for that stuff, plus some interest, plus a bit of extra, because we had to wait for it. And the city guy says, or the city merchant, or even a semi-rich person says, I don't have the money for that, but here's some of it, and I'll give you the rest next time you come. Okay, we'll have a 3 monthly payment every time we're back here. 3 months, every 3 months you make a payment plus interest. Okay, yep, I got to keep my business going. So that's how it would have gone down. Very natural trading, interest rates, interest coming along on loans, or vice versa. The trading person comes to the door of the merchant and says, I owe you that money, but I don't have it. Okay, well, give it to us next time, plus a bit extra, so on and so forth. So this trading people, these trading groups, castes, they're a caste, probably a very ancient caste that goes back into ancient history, trading between tribal regions, tribes, and cities. And then very naturally, you start doing things like loans and interest, which was outlawed in a lot of ancient Christianity. But it doesn't work. You have to get interest, so it's very natural. So all these differences are going on in these northern European and other places, very culturally different at that time. And so there's a lot of antagonism builds up. And then you get to this era where you get the second, or after the First World War, Hitler's coming to power, the Nazis. There's a whole Zionist movement that's been going on since the late 19th century and is built up to say, we can't go home, we're staying here, and if you want us to go somewhere, we need our own homeland. So eventually they say, well, there's a place in Palestine where your people are from. There's a group there of highly concentrated Jews. I forget the name of that right now, but they go there, and the British have agreed that you can go there if you're not comfortable here, because we're going to start, the Nazis are going to start, we believe in this, they have an idea of a superior race, right? And so part of that whole thing with the interest rates, the whole thing of Jews charging interest on loans, for example, that's a bit, even though they've started to do it in Europe, it's still frowned upon a little bit. And so, and then this whole idea of this superior race, which are the Aryans, which comes up with this sort of a historian, I believe he's German, English, German, something like that, in the late 19th century. So he's proposing this idea that the sort of Germanic people, because Germany has not been a country for very long at that point, don't forget. It was all these principalities up until, I'm not sure when Germany became one big country. It's not that long ago. So compared to, let's say, Scotland, which was one of the oldest kingdoms in Europe, unified kingdom. And so this idea of this master race, Aryans, it comes from this idea that this historian is proposing that the people of that region sort of come from the Far East, Afghanistan, and especially India, right? Pakistan, India. Pakistan was not yet, was part of India back then. So late 19th century, early 20th century maybe. So that proposal comes along, and he's just saying that that's where we came from, right? Which might have a lot of truth to it in ancient times, very ancient times. So as a sort of Romany people, right? Not invaders, just people roaming and trading and roaming and staying and trading as people have always done. That's how people came out of Africa. They didn't come out of Africa to say, hey, let's go explore the world. They just traded with the next group over and ended up trading more and more, moving further and further over hundreds, thousands of years, right? Thousands, around the coast and up the rivers. So they eventually become these caravan people traders and move up to Northern Europe long before there was a Germany or even an England or even a Scotland. So this guy's saying that our race comes from this other civilization known as India, or the ancient civilizations, Southeast Asian civilizations, and it was a better civilization. So his point was it was a highly sophisticated, highly advanced, scientific civilization. That's what he says. And so, but then that evolves into this idea among some people who misinterpret what he's saying as being, oh, that means we're superior. He's saying it was a superior civilization. We're from a superior civilization, therefore we're superior. Now that's what it sort of evolves from. And then I don't know how the Egyptian thing fitted in their minds, because obviously the Egyptian is a huge advanced civilization of the era. So now that's all infiltrated, and there's these traveling, trading people in Germany, for example, Ukraine, Russia. These pogroms start in Russia where riots against Jews, Jewish people sticking around, trading people, these trading people sticking around, trading, becoming more successful over time. And then that ends up in the Nazis, who really are xenophobic because they started bringing this idea of a master race, the Aryan race, right? And so then they're looking for a homeland. So the whole homeland thing is not that much different than, they're looking for a homeland for the Jews. The whole homeland thing is not that much different than, let's say, when the Native Americans were told to stay in settlements or reservations, right? So this is worldwide. It's the same thing with the Rohingya in Myanmar, Burma, as it used to be called when I was growing up. So Myanmar, the Rohingya and the Uyghurs in Western China. You can think of dozens of examples in relatively modern times, where there's a roaming people who come into another region that has a fairly sophisticated idea of its culture and country, and then either through their own actions, which I've been told by people who are kind of on the ground there and connected, the Rohingya start to settle down in Burma and create their own towns, and because they have a pretty rigid or fundamentalist style religion, which many people have, many peoples and cultures have, they start to ostracize those who are not part of that in that town. And so that's where part of that tension comes up. It's not just Myanmar and the people, the Burmese people, the Myanmar people, trying to get, having xenophobia. Sometimes it comes from the people who are settling in those regions who have the xenophobia. That goes for the pilgrims who went to America by the way. It's the same thing. They started kicking people out or ostracizing or demonizing. Long story there, but one of the reasons they got persecuted was because they were persecuting others in their own towns. They're fundamentalist nut jobs, right? So all these fundamentalist religions are mad because that's where it all stems from. The pilgrims end up in Holland, almost starved to death, have to come back to Britain. The pilgrim fathers, some of the leaders, are kept in port at Southampton in England because they didn't have any papers. They're trying to figure out who these people are. Eventually they figure them out, let them go. The pilgrims call that oppression, and other things, the fact that they're not allowed to be oppressive themselves in their own towns and villages, and demonize all these other people because they're fundamentalist Christians, so they sail off to America, and that's where that comes from, right? So the same with the Rohingya. Rohingya apparently were doing that a little bit in Myanmar. So of course the local towns and villages and people are going to get a bit pissed off that this new fundamentalist type, to them it's fundamentalist, that if you're not with us, you're against us kind of religion, right? A bit like the fundamentalists in America today. So, and the Jews were like that in some places, not all of them, but in some places in Northern Europe and Germany and Russia and places like that. That's why they pissed people off, because they're not integrating. Same thing happens today. In England, I hear all the time, I live in America, but I hear all the time these people complaining about these people, immigrants, who don't integrate and they're changing the culture. Everybody, it's a natural thing to want to hang on to your old culture, right? So, and some of the historical aspects that you're proud of, that's natural. But now these people, many Africans and Muslims and others, are being sort of targeted or at least verbally targeted, because they're not assimilating with the old culture. So that's just normal, happens all the time, and it's the same thing that happened. And then in Germany, just at the rise of the greatest technological era of all time, both militarily and in terms of communication, TV, radio, vast influence across his country, Hitler, and the Nazis, etc., suddenly become these very powerful voices in a way that no one has ever experienced before in the history of the human race, with this technology and radio, TV, all of it, movies, right, and local theatres, all of that, right? So the Nazis come up, they make an agreement with the Zionists, some of the Zionists, to have this place, and it becomes the idea of Israel. And then the Nazis get more and more xenophobic and racist, well, wrong word for it, but racist against Jews, and that ends up in the gas chambers of the Second World War, the worst imaginable war of all time. Let's hope it's the last one. It is the last one. It is the big war, the last big war, right? It is World War. So World War II. And it's the last big war. You know, this thing that's going on in Gaza is tiny, it's horrible, it's a type of genocide, yes, mass murder going on in Gaza by the Zionists of Israel government, but it's not a world war, and it's not going to turn into a world war. But the Second World War was that horrible era. And then 1948, not long after the Second World War, when everyone's sick of war, no one wants any more war, Israel takes over, or the Zionists take over Palestine, big parts of Palestine and Israel, right, to call it Israel, right, 1948. Nobody really intervenes because they're sick of the whole thing. And as far as they're concerned, that's just a bunch of desert tribal people fighting far away in the distance, you know. Yeah, you wouldn't pay much attention. So a lot more history to that, can't possibly go over it. I'm simply talking about the basics of what human beings do and what they are. And that's where these Nazis came from, this idea, simple idea, that they came originally from genetically from some other place, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that kind of thing, the Aryans, and then that becomes a supremacist thing in Germany. And then this other idea now, today, you have this idea of a Jewish state in Israel. It's literally, they voted, as far as I know, it went through so that they would then call Israel, what they call Israel, a Jewish state. And now they're the ones who are saying, you people stay in those reservations because you're a nasty bunch and we've taken this land, it's ours, stay in the reservations, right? So just like Americans 200 years ago, right, you Native Americans, you stay in those reservations, right? Don't, you can come out and trade, do work for us, and you can travel a bit, but mostly don't come around us. It's the same thing. It's going on in Israel. I'm exaggerating, but it's a bit like that. There's stories now of young Israelis coming out just recently, in the last 10 years or so, realizing they'd come out of a school or private schools in Jerusalem, and they're told all these things about what Palestinians are. Then they actually go visit Palestine and get on really well with the people and realize that those people are being oppressed. So there's all these stories coming out now. A lot of Jewish people do not support this sort of mass murder in Gaza. Now, the whole story of Israel itself and what's going on there, I talked about in other videos. I can't possibly get into that right now. But the point here is that this Haavara transfer agreement is very interesting because it relates to the whole of history, going back thousands of years and back to those zealots on top of the Masada being chased down by the Romans, and the traveling people / working people, workers, immigrant workers in Egypt being turned into slaves, them running out of there and becoming this tribal people, or being part, I guess they're reunited with other parts of their tribe maybe, but there's lots of different aspects to Judaism. Like I say, there's Jewish sects that don't think Israel should have a country. there's the Zionists who think they should, and there's others who are off somewhere else and barely even pay attention, really. So up in Turkey and Iran, they live a pretty good life in Iran. That's a fact. The Jewish people that live there, and so on and so forth. Egypt, and so the Haavara Agreement is only interesting because it relates to all this other history, but it's nothing new, is the point of this video. It's nothing new. It's always happened. It's happening today in England, which I keep hearing about. Oh, these immigrants are not integrating. Not just Africans and Middle Eastern people. It's Polish, because that's part of Europe now. They're not integrating. They're speaking their own language. They're bringing their funny religion with them, Catholicism. I don't think they do that much, but they're filling up. There's certain schools that are, in some places, people have talked about certain schools being almost all Polish or Ukrainian now, because a lot of them left Ukraine. Polish children, so Eastern European, which is a very, very different culture from Britain. If you don't know that, you don't know how the world works. We look a bit the same, but it's not. It's very different culturally, historically, psychologically. It's just everything about it. It's very different, and so you can sort of understand that English people are worried that their old culture is sort of being superseded, but that happens everywhere all the time. You can't stop it. We took over, or not me, because we tried to fight again. We tried to give the British tried to give a huge region in the middle of America called the Indian country. They tried to give a giant part of this continent to the Indians, not just a reservation. But then the Americans took the colonies by cheating, basically, and I won't go into that here. But so I'm from the British, and that's where I come from, which the British were not trying to wipe out or put all the Indians, Native Americans in reservations. They ended up doing that. So no different from all of that going on everywhere today. And the situation today is horrific. It's a quagmire. You're going to see Israel, this idea of a state of Israel, dissolve because of the way they conducted this. They're not the greatest military in the world. They have the greatest weaponry, but they're not very clever people, like all the people who are in the military, in any military. The Americans, the intelligence agencies in America, they're not very clever people. And in general, the tensions in Israel have made things a lot worse, so it's harder to think straight. So you made a mess of it, the quagmire of Gaza. You made tens of thousands of new jihadists. Do that to me and mine, I'm coming for you. If I was like a 12-year-old kid or a 20-year-old kid, I'd be, look at what they did. It's disgusting. So they've become the oppressors, the murderers, the Zionists, not Israel, not the Jews, but the people in charge. And I don't think they'll ever be forgiven for that. I don't think they'll ever be forgiven for what they've done by the world. And so I think that spells the slow demise of what they call Israel. It will. It will turn into a true democracy eventually, under supervision from the UN or something. But eventually it'll be a very good democracy, and that they will vote Israel off the map. And you've made it. So there was no good solution to this from the get-go because of the Haavara Agreement. But those things are nothing new, is the only point I'm making. It's just that in this day and age, we are now dealing with the results of something like that. As I kind of think, I don't think this will happen, but I think Rwanda and the countries around there, Congo, all of that, will maybe, if we keep sending Africans to Rwanda, I think you're going to end up with the same thing hundreds of years from now. Some kind of battles going on between these, what they perceive as foreigners, whatever. But whatever it is, I don't think they'll be the same because it's not considered a homeland. It's just, they're just being taken or sent back, transferred to Rwanda. But this quagmire that they're in, it's a mess. Everybody can see it. There are many stories about that. A lot of the atrocities were false. But this Haavara Agreement is kind of central. However, I have to say, as I've explained in this video, it's nothing new. So sorry for the long video. Fascinating topic. Thanks for the question. I probably won't talk about that again because I think I explained it. It's the travelling people. It's a caste system. That's where it all comes from. And then those travelling people settling down in many regions that they were not culturally attuned to, and those people of those regions, just as today is happening, though these foreigners or illegal immigrants or any immigrants, they're not part of our culture that we're used to. It happens in America. These immigrants are changing our culture. You know, the 1950s family with the pipe and the 2.4 kids, mostly white, right? But that's an exaggeration. But the idea of changing the American culture, which is only a couple of 300 years old, and you're changing our culture because we changed the previous culture by almost wiping them out, the Native Americans. So the culture is going to change. You have to get used to it. Immigrants are going to come. They're some of your best people in many ways, and you need them. And it's just an ancient problem that humans have to deal with. So deal with it. It's coming. Our culture and society, maintain the history if you can, because it's interesting, but get used to the idea it's going to change. And you're going to have to adapt to the people that are going to come into your country from other places and other cultures, just like the Jews did into Northern Europe. And it caused all those consternation. It's the same thing. It's always been the same. Like when the Romans came to Palestine and the Israelis, the zealots, end up on the Masada being killed off, right? Because they were against the Romans coming in and taking their bit. So that's what it all is. It's human nature. It's all going to change right now. Now, how the quagmire of Gaza comes together out of that, that's the most difficult thing. I don't see how that happens, but it is going to resolve itself. So that cliche phrase, this too shall pass, is the truth, and it's coming real soon. You'll see it. I don't know what kind of truce they're going to make, but somehow there's going to be a slow diminishment of the differences, is all I'll say. So perhaps this Haavara agreement is actually one of the last aspects of the human species, which is so antagonistic to each other, culturally put themselves into these cloistered cultures, which I'll just call fundamentalist groups, such as some aspects of Judaism in Northern Europe were, sticking to your own people, Rohingyas in Burma, Myanmar, or the English and the Scottish. If you're Scottish, you go to England. It's not so bad, but it used to be. English go to Scotland. It's a bit risky, some places in Scotland. Oh, you're one of them. You're English. There's some places in Scotland you would not go back in the day if you were English. People called me English because my parents were English. I'm actually more Scandinavian when you look deep down. But I was afraid to tell people I was English. Some people go, you're English, and they'd be really nasty about it, but mostly they're just joking around. These are kids, children, and teenagers. They're mostly just joking around. They didn't hate the English, really. So you wouldn't get beaten up for being English back in the day. You would get beaten up for being a Celtic supporter or a Rangers supporter. That's the things that you get beaten up for. So there's antagonism and tribalism has been part of the human species. It's part of human nature. There's no way out of it, except that things are going to come together now. And with the smaller world that we all live in, the younger people are going to feel it the most. And it could take on all sorts of forms that are not pretty or seem normal to my generation. But they are going to be coming together more and more accepting. A lot like massive purging of differences. The idea of differences is going to happen in the next few weeks, because I think this Israel thing has brought a lot of people together, split up a lot of people, but it's going to end up in a sort of just an acceptance. And if it's not, you're all dead. So good luck. Bye.